The Trap of the North Sea Storm. November 14, 1940. The freezing North Sea, 50 miles east of Aberdeen, Scotland. The roar of the engines is a physical weight, pressing against the chest of Major Kurt Cressman. His leaning into the storm, a monstrous swirl of black cloud and horizontal rain that claws at the twin-engined Heinkel He-111H4 bomber. Cressman, a veteran pilot with the rank of Staffelkapitän, wipes a bead of condensation from the thick perspex canopy, his goggles already streaked. Below them, the waves are grey, violent peaks, an environment that the Luftwaffe planners had bet on. This wasn't a precision daylight raid. This was a nocturnal intrusion, a harassment mission exploiting the very worst weather the British winter could offer. Their target, the vital docks of Aberdeen, part of a calculated strategy to bleed Britain's supply lines during the sustained pressure of the Blitz. Altitude holding at 3,000 meters, Major, shouts Oberleutnant Gunther Hartwig, the navigator, his voice strained above the din. The winds are trying to throw us 20 kilometers south of the track. British coastal defenses won't be flying in this Schweinwetter. The logic was sound, a doctrine honed during the summer's Battle of Britain. German High Command believed that the nascent and relatively primitive Freya and Wurzburg radar systems, which they themselves used, were fundamentally impaired by heavy precipitation and cloud cover. The massive moisture content in the air should scatter and absorb the radio waves, blinding the enemy. A dark night and a severe gale were, therefore, a protective shield, a tactical invisibility cloak for the incoming Kampfgeschwader. Cressman grips the yoke. Visibility is near zero. His flying entirely by instruments, trusting the altimeter and the directional gyroscope more than his own eyes. They've been airborne for almost 2 hours, crossing the silent, black expanse of the sea. The radio operator, Unteroffizier Erich Vogel, reports silence from their formation colleagues. Everyone is focused on surviving the transit. 10 minutes to coast in, Hartwig announces, shining his small map light onto the chart. We'll drop below the main cloud base at the last moment. Ready the flares, Eric. Cressman nods grimly, but before he can respond, the intercom crackles with a burst of static, followed by Vogel's sharp, panicked German. Major. Contact. Unidentified aircraft 3 o'clock high. Range, 2,000 meters and closing fast. What in the? The eerie precision of the unknown United Kingdom. What in the? The warning is cut short by a sound that slices through the Heinkel's engine noise, the rapid, metallic thump-thump-thump of cannon fire. Tracer rounds, blindingly bright, streak past Cressman's canopy, seeming to violate the very laws of physics. How could anything be maneuvering with such precision in this violent squall, let alone finding them in the thick, opaque darkness? Cressman instinctively pushes the stick forward, plunging the heavy bomber into a near-vertical dive, hoping to shake the unseen attacker. Hartwig. Damage report. Evasive action. Negative hits on the main body, Major, but the port engine is smoking. We're losing power. Hartwig yells back, scrambling to secure his charts. Cressman fights the controls, battling the combined effect of the storm and the sudden thrust asymmetry. He levels off momentarily, desperately searching the darkness. There. A flicker, a silhouette, gone in an instant. It was smaller, faster, and alarmingly close. A British night fighter, a Bristol bow fighter, judging by the heavy armament. But how did it get here? And how did it locate them? The official Luftwaffe intelligence briefings had assured every Staffelkapitän that the British relied on ground observers and sound locators in poor weather. Night flying over the sea, especially in a storm, was considered safe from interceptors until they were near the target and actively illuminated by searchlights. Yet, here they were, 20 minutes from the British coast, targeted with the accuracy of a clear day interception. Vogel, recovering from the shock, is yelling into the radio mic, trying to raise their squadron leader. We are under attack. Repeat, under attack. Unknown fighter presence. The bow fighter appears again, this time from below and behind, a silent ghost until the cannons open up. This attack is devastating. The tracers walk right up the Heinkel's fuselage. The aircraft shudders violently. The cockpit is momentarily filled with the smell of burning oil and electrical ozone. Control surfaces heavy, rudder unresponsive. Cressman shouts, sweat mixing with a cold spray of condensation. He knows the grim arithmetic of being caught by a night fighter. It's not a duel, it's an execution. With a wrenching tear, the port engine catches fire, blossoming into a spectacular, orange-red bloom against the black canvas of the storm. The noise is deafening, the vibrations unbearable. Cressman fights the urge to panic. focusing on maintaining attitude, but the Heinkel is now a damaged brick. "We are going down," Cressman states, his voice eerily calm amidst the chaos. "Prepare for ditching. Send the distress signal, Eric. Abandon the mission. Hartwig, destroy the encryption codes." The roar of the fire overtakes the engine noise. Cressman forces the bomber lower, aiming for a relatively flat section of the churning sea. The last thing he sees before the impact is the Beaufighter's silhouette peeling away into the storm, its mission complete, leaving them to the mercy of the North Sea. The subsequent crash is violent, a sickening crunch of metal and water that plunges the world into icy, suffocating blackness. The cold clarity of captivity. The subsequent crash is violent, a sickening crunch of metal and water that plunges the world into icy, suffocating blackness. Major Kurt Cressman regained consciousness to the sound of waves sloshing against a damp wooden deck. He was shivering violently, wrapped in a thick, coarse blanket. After hours drifting in a rubber dinghy, he and Oberleutnant Hartwig had been picked up by a British trawler acting as a patrol vessel. Unteroffizier Fogel and the rest of the crew were lost to the storm. Now, Cressman sat in a dimly lit, sparsely furnished room at a hastily established interrogation center in Scotland. A tall, impeccably dressed RAF officer, Group Captain Alistair Reed, offered him a lukewarm cup of tea. "You're lucky to be alive, Major," Reed said, his English crisp and precise. "That was a terrible night for flying." Cressman merely grunted, nursing his injured arm. He was still processing the impossible encounter. The weather was our shield. How could your pilot find us 20 miles out? It defies all logic. Reed smiled faintly, a knowing, almost pitying expression. The logic of the Luftwaffe intelligence reports. You relied on the storm, Major, but the storm, I assure you, was no obstacle for us. Over the next 2 days of polite but firm interrogation, the conversation circled back to the technical impossibility of their interception. Cressman was convinced the Beaufighter had somehow gotten lucky, perhaps stumbled upon them by chance, or that a coastal ship had spotted their running lights. He was desperate to maintain the belief that their doctrine flying high in bad weather was sound. Finally, during an afternoon break, Reed placed a large, slightly distorted photograph on the table. It was a picture of a massive steel structure, tall lattice masts supporting a network of wires. "Do you recognize this, Major?" Reed asked. Cressman scoffed. "Some kind of new radio transmitter? It seems excessively large." "It is large," Reed conceded, "and it transmits, but not quite in the way you imagine. We call it chain home. It's been operational for some time now. In fact, it was running during the whole Battle of Britain, and it was running when your unfortunate aircraft crossed our detection line." Reed leaned closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially, yet making sure every word sank in. "You believe your radar, your Freya and Wurzburg sets are limited by weather, and they are, Major. They operate on short wavelengths, which are easily absorbed and scattered by heavy rain and cloud cover. It makes their screens look like a bowl of soup in a thunderstorm." He paused, letting the German officer contemplate the technical detail. "We, however, use a much longer wavelength. A long wave sees right through the clouds. It sees through the rain. It sees the metal of your Heinkel, Major, regardless of how dark the night is or how severe the storm is battering the English Channel. It's like using a flashlight versus a searchlight." Cressman stared at the photograph, then at Reed, a dawning horror replacing his arrogance. The Kriegsmarine and Luftwaffe had spent months debating why their raids, even in the worst weather, seemed to be anticipated. If what Reed said was true, if the British had a functioning, long-wave, all-weather detection system. "That is impossible," Cressman whispered, suddenly feeling the freezing chill of the North Sea all over again. "The scale of deception, that is impossible," Cressman whispered, suddenly feeling the freezing chill of the North Sea all over again. Group Captain Reed leaned back, satisfied with the reaction. This was the moment of intellectual surrender they aimed for, breaking the confidence of the German technical elite. "Impossible? Major, in 1939, you and your colleagues assumed the British only had small, ineffective coastal detection posts. In reality, before the Battle of Britain even began, we had built a continuous, interlocking ring of these stations, the chain home network stretching from the Orkney Islands down to the Isle of Wight." Reed picked up a pen and began sketching a crude diagram on a notepad. "Your technical staff were correct that high-frequency radar, like the $50/text, cm, a dollar wavelength used by your Wurzburg sets, is excellent for accuracy but terrible for overcoming weather and terrain. It works well for pointing flak guns once the target is visible, but not for finding it through a gale. We chose to sacrifice some accuracy for range and reliability, Reed continued. Chain Home operated at a long wavelength around 10 to 13 meters. These long radio waves, produced by massive pulses of power, simply diffracted around the water droplets and ice particles in the atmosphere. They penetrate the storm front. Cressman stared at the sketch, processing the monumental strategic implications. The entire Luftwaffe operational doctrine for night and bad weather flying was predicated on a false assumption. When you flew in, Major, Reed explained, his voice taking on the tone of a history lecturer, your Heinkel was picked up by the Chain Home station near Ventnor while you were still 50 miles out over the North Sea. The signal, the plot, was passed immediately to the filter room in London, then routed directly to the sector station commanding the Aberdeen defence area. The interception was not luck, Major, Reed concluded, tapping the photo of the radar tower. It was a system. The bow fighter that shot you down call sign Dagger 4 was guided to a point in space, well before they could visually acquire you, by an operator sitting in a dark room watching a screen. They knew your altitude, your course, and your speed, minute by minute, throughout the entire storm. That is how the pilot found you in zero visibility. The realization hit Cressman like a physical blow. Their greatest tactical advantage, the use of weather as cover, had been a myth all along, shattered by a technology they had fundamentally misunderstood and severely underestimated. It wasn't just his plane that was lost, it was the entire premise of Hitler's aerial strategy against Britain. All this time, Cressman muttered, the blood draining from his face, we thought we were fighting against searchlights and luck. We were fighting ghosts guided by radio waves. The unseen shield of Chain Home all this time, Cressman muttered, the blood draining from his face, we thought we were fighting against searchlights and luck. We were fighting ghosts guided by radio waves. Group Captain Reed leaned forward one last time, cementing the magnitude of the revelation. Precisely, Major. And those radio waves gave us the one commodity you couldn't buy with superior aircraft or pilot training: time. Time to scramble our fighters, time to position them correctly, and time to rest our pilots when we knew you weren't coming. He explained how the $10 meter a dollar wavelength of the Chain Home system, while less accurate than later German models, provided warning at ranges of up to 100 miles, consistently. The raw data, the blips on the cathode ray tubes, were quickly processed by the Women's Auxiliary Air Force (WAAF) personnel who translated the coordinates and altitude into clear, actionable intelligence. It's not just the technology, Reed continued, tapping the table rhythmically. It's the integration. Your pilots were intercepted because the Chain Home radar fed its information directly into the Dowding system, an integrated command and control network that linked the ground observers, the filter rooms, the sector stations, and the fighters in the air. Every action of the Luftwaffe was, quite literally, observed and counteracted in real time. Cressman realized the catastrophic error in the German strategy during the summer of 1940. The Luftwaffe leadership, confident in their own technological assumptions, had launched massive air attacks aimed at destroying the RAF's airfields and aircraft. Yet, they had systematically failed to prioritize the destruction of the massive, unglamorous radar towers dotting the coast. They assumed these structures were mere communications relays, not the linchpin of the entire British air defense. You concentrated your attacks on Fighter Command's airfields, Major, Reed said quietly. A sensible target, if you knew nothing else. But every time your bombers took off from occupied France, we knew they were coming long before they crossed the coast. We knew their altitude, their strength, and their vector. We were able to conserve our limited fighter strength, sending up only the minimum necessary to meet your attacks, while you flew blind. The sheer scale of the deception, built on the British genius for misdirection and secrecy, was overwhelming. The ability of the long-wave radar to penetrate weather was the final, devastating piece of the puzzle. Cressman's terrifying interception in the storm wasn't a fluke. It was standard operating procedure, demonstrating the continuous, 24/7 coverage of the island. The Major sat back, defeated. The storm that was supposed to protect them had become the ultimate vulnerability, proving that the British had not merely survived the Battle of Britain, they had won it by using an unseen electronic shield, one that worked even when the sky was at its worst. He finally understood why the night raids were proving so costly, and why Britain simply refused to break. Dissemination and denial German, he finally understood why the night raids were proving so costly, and why Britain simply refused to break. The weeks that followed Major Cressman's capture were spent detailing his harrowing experience, not just to his British captors, but eventually encoded communications to German intelligence agents operating in neutral countries. The information regarding the long-wavelength capabilities of Chain-Home, its ability to track formations through thick storms, was deemed by Cressman to be the most vital intelligence he possessed. However, the reality of communicating such a fundamental tactical failure back to the Reichsluftfahrtministerium (RLM) proved to be another hurdle entirely. When Cressman's preliminary reports eventually reached Colonel Joseph Kamhuber, the man responsible for organizing the Luftwaffe's burgeoning night fighter defense system, the response was met with deep skepticism and, in many quarters, outright denial. The leading German radar scientists and engineers, having pioneered the effective, high-frequency $50/text (cm) technology of the Wurzburg radar, considered the idea of the British successfully building and operating a long-wave $10/text meter a system with sufficient power and clarity to plot aircraft 100 miles out to be technologically crude and inefficient. They suffered from the same hubris that had led to Cressman's capture. It is a fabrication, a propaganda ploy, argued Dr. Hans Rosenstein, a prominent radar expert in Berlin, in one heated meeting documented later by intelligence summaries. The energy required to propagate usable signals at that wavelength through a storm front, with minimal distortion, is simply beyond the current state of British electronics. The Major is likely exaggerating or has been intentionally misled. This internal denial was compounded by the fact that German long-wave radar experiments, such as the SeaTac used by the Kriegsmarine, did not possess the same power output or sensitivity as the massive British Chain-Home stations. The Germans believed that their superior shortwave technology, offering better precision for gun laying, was universally superior. They could not conceive that the British had prioritized early warning over pinpoint accuracy. Consequently, while the Luftwaffe did eventually start prioritizing night fighting tactics, leading to the eventual evolution of the Himmelbett system, the fundamental lesson Cressman provided was minimized. The full, deadly truth about the Chain-Home system's all-weather capability was sidelined as a low-priority British deception. This profound misjudgment meant that for years to come, German bomber formations continued to rely on poor visibility, thick cloud cover, and storms as protection, only to find themselves consistently intercepted with uncanny precision by British night fighters like the Beaufighter and later the Mosquito, guided not by luck, but by the relentless, unseen sweep of the long-wave radio pulses that sliced right through the tempest. The shield they trusted was paper-thin.